He carries himself like a surgeon, but his hands shake with something else, something hungrier. Thomas Neill Cream moves through Victorian London with the precision of a man who believes the world is a laboratory and he is the only scientist who matters. He considers women of low caste little more than cattle made for butchering, yet he pursues them with an intensity that suggests dependence, not dominance. The contradiction lives in him like a second heartbeat. You can see it in the way he approaches them, the medical man, the healer, the educated gentleman from across the Atlantic. He wears respectability like a costume, but underneath there's this trembling need to prove something that can never quite be proven. Each encounter is both a performance and an experiment, each woman a test subject for a hypothesis he can never fully articulate. When in the company of these women, he may have been unable to perform without the use of drugs. Therefore, intimidated and reminded of his impotency, he manifested a loathing for anything that should have but failed to arouse him. He was in the habit of taking pills compounded of strychnine, morphia, and cocaine, which he declared had an aphrodisiac effect. The strychnine becomes his language. Not the blunt instrument of a knife or the passion of strangulation, but the cold, calculated administration of poison. Distance wrapped in medical authority. He doesn't need to touch them as they die. He only needs to know that he gave them something they trusted him enough to swallow. The power isn't in the violence, it's in the betrayal of trust, dressed up as care. Think about the psychology of the poisoner. It's the ultimate expression of intellectual superiority. The victim doesn't even know they're dying until it's too late. Cream could watch from across a room, across a street, knowing he'd set a chemical timer that no one else could see. To know that they would die that night, an excruciating death, would help cure his ills, releasing an inner frustration that bottled up inside him like a volcano. But here's where his mind begins to crack. Through his blackmail letters, Cream succeeded in drawing close attention to himself. He drew attention to murders he had already gotten away with by writing letters accusing others of the deaths of these women.
The pattern is almost incomprehensible to a rational mind. He poisons successfully, escapes detection, then writes letters to authorities pointing toward his own crimes. Not confessions, accusations against others. But in the accusations, he referred to the murder of Matilda Clover. Clover's death had been registered under natural causes. The police quickly realized that the false accuser who had written the letter was the serial killer. This isn't mere arrogance, this is something deeper, a compulsion to be seen, even at the cost of freedom, perhaps especially at that cost. The narcissist's dilemma lives here. The crime only exists if someone knows about it. What good is brilliance without an audience? What value does superiority have if no one acknowledges it? Cream couldn't bear the silence of his perfect murders. The anonymity became more unbearable than the risk of capture.
You see this when he met a policeman from New York and gave him a brief tour of where the various victims had lived. The American mentioned it to a British policeman who found Cream's detailed knowledge suspicious. He's practically begging to be caught, but in a way that still lets him feel superior. He's not confessing, he's showing off, teaching, demonstrating his intimate knowledge of death while maintaining the pretense of innocence. Others who shared conversations with Cream would later relate his aversion to females of low caste, yet he sought them out obsessively. The contradiction reveals the fracture in his identity. He needs what he despises what he needs. The women become screens for his own self-loathing, repositories for the parts of himself he cannot accept. The medical degree, the proper appearance, the travels between continents, all of it scaffolding around a hollow center. He constructs Thomas Neill Cream, doctor as meticulously as he compounds his poisons. But the construction is never quite solid enough. There's always this gap between who he needs to be and who he is. In court, he insisted he was only Dr. Thomas Neill, not Thomas Neill Cream, as if he could split himself in two, preserve the respectable half while sacrificing the other. But the split was always there, wasn't it? The healer and the killer, the gentleman and the predator, the brilliant doctor and the impotent man who needed chemicals to feel anything at all. Consider the choice of strychnine. His approach favored strychnine's overt agony over undetectable subtlety to satisfy his psychological urges. He could have chosen untraceable poisons, but he didn't. He wanted the agony to be visible, dramatic, undeniable. The convulsions, the arched back, the rictus grin of strychnine poisoning. He needed the death to be a performance, even if he wasn't there to watch it. This is control masquerading as chaos. He triggers the poison and then leaves, but the leaving itself is calculated. He's not running from the scene, he's demonstrating that he doesn't need to be there. The death will happen according to his schedule, his chemistry, his will. Time and distance become tools of dominance. But the blackmail letters betray the facade. As he had done in Chicago, Cream drew attention to the murders he had already gotten away with, a pattern that transcends mere risk-taking. This is self-sabotage dressed as superiority. Each letter is both a boast and a cry for recognition. "Look what I've done," they say. "Stop me," they whisper. The duality extends to his final moments. His alleged last words on the scaffold were, "I am Jack the..." Even facing death, he reaches for a grander narrative, a more famous monster to become. Thomas Neill Cream isn't enough. He needs to be the Ripper, even though he was in prison at the time of the Ripper murders. The truth doesn't matter. Only the story, only the myth. This is the narcissist's ultimate prison. Nothing is ever enough. No crime is significant enough, no identity is grand enough, no recognition is complete enough. He poisons women not because he hates them, but because he hates the part of himself that needs them. He writes letters not because he wants to be caught, but because being unknown is worse than being imprisoned. In the end, Thomas Neill Cream wasn't destroyed by justice or conscience or the weight of his crimes. He was destroyed by his own desperate need to be seen, to matter, to exist in the eyes of others. The poison he gave to others was swift and agonizing. The poison he gave himself, this crushing need for recognition, was slower but infinitely more corrosive. The most terrifying thing about Cream isn't what he did. It's the ordinary human needs that drove him. The need to be seen, to be significant, to matter, twisted into something monstrous. He shows us how the gap between who we are and who we need to be can become an abyss. And in that abyss, anything becomes possible. Even now, his ghost seeks recognition, demands you remember his name, not as Thomas Neill Cream, the failed doctor, the impotent man, the son who never measured up, but as something more, something worse, something that mattered.
The real horror is that he was just a man with a medical degree and a desperate need to be more than ordinary. The bodies were just punctuation marks in a story he was telling himself about himself. And in the telling, in the terrible telling, he revealed the most human truth of all. We are all trying to convince ourselves we matter. Some of us just use different methods of persuasion.